Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So I recently read Camille Cosby's statement in support of her husband, Bill Cosby. And what I want to do is briefly summarize some of the key points that she made in her statement and then provide my commentary. So basically, she starts off by talking about how the framers were wealthy white men who owned slaves. And she talks about how many people, most people, were not included in a lot of the constitutional rights that were laid out by the framers. She goes on to talk about how there were amendments to the Constitution, etc., that included other groups of people. And then she goes on to blast the media, to blast the prosecutor, to blast the accusers in this Bill Cosby case. And she basically says that her husband was a victim of mob justice, not real justice. She also complains about how the media deprived Bill Cosby of his 14th and 5th Amendment rights. And then she talks about how the prosecution engaged in unethical behavior, and et cetera, et cetera. And she compares Bill Cosby to Emmett Till. And you all are familiar with Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy who was lynched back in the 50s, brutally beaten beyond recognition and thrown in a river, allegedly for whistling at a white woman. And this white woman would later accuse him of sexually assaulting her during the trial. She would make those false statements before the jury. And so you had a situation where Camille Cosby is comparing Bill Cosby to Emmett Till, and then she also compares Bill Cosby to another African-American by the name of Daryl Hunt, a man who was wrongfully accused of rape, and he was later exonerated by DNA evidence. So basically, that's it in a nutshell. I will include a link to the article so that you can read her statement for yourself and judge it for yourself. But right now, I want to just provide my commentary. You know, the first thing I'll say is this. I understand a woman being loyal to her husband, being dedicated to her husband, and standing by her husband. But this situation is absolutely ridiculous. Here you have a man that's cheated on his wife on multiple occasions. He is admitted to doing so. And yet she still stands by him. Here you have a man that's been accused of sexually abusing 60 women. But yet she stands by this man. You know, in his deposition, he talks about the measures that he would go through to try to avoid this information being leaked to his wife, or her finding out about these quote-unquote sexual rendezvous and this and that. But yet and still, this woman is standing by this man. And in some ways, you could say that that's commendable, but I don't think that it's commendable. I think it shows a weakness. You know, I think it shows a lack of self-esteem and self-respect. I think that it is a sign of a woman enabling an abuser, enabling someone to continue this pattern of abuse. And then to defend him after this trial, after a jury considered the evidence. And that's another thing. I mean, this is not a situation of mob justice at all. Not at all. He had a trial. He had a trial before a jury of his peers. This is not an all-white jury situation. It's not a jury of all white women or anything like that. There were 2 African Americans on that jury. There were 7 men on that jury. So this isn't a situation where it was an all-female jury or a jury of all women making some kind of biased decision against a man. So that's the first thing. And then this whole playing on the race card, you know, this whole race pandering and, you know, race hustling. There's been a whole part of this whole case. You know, it's been, you know, in this whole online community where you have all these race hustlers, you know, these race pimps trying to make this into some race issue. And I would be very surprised if Camille Cosby actually wrote this statement for herself. You know, I'm sure that it's probably some PR firm or something who put together this statement. But I think that that's a whole situation where you have somebody playing the race card, trying to play up this situation and make it into some racial issue and some racial cause when it is not that kind of situation. Again, you had African Americans on this jury. You had African American victims here, African American women who have been abused by this man. But yet they want to frame it as some kind of race issue, some kind of racial injustice or something like that, when it wasn't that kind of situation. This was not a mob justice situation. This was a court of law. This was not a lynch mob. This man, Bill Cosby, was well represented by the best attorneys money could buy. By the best attorneys money could buy. He had the best PR people available to him to counter the messages in the media. So this is not some helpless man that was a victim of mob justice. And the fact that you have this woman putting out this statement, is all she's doing is trying to enable this guy. She is enabling an abuser. That's what she's doing at the end of the day. And I know that she wants to get him off and stuff like that. He's her husband and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, she is essentially trying to enable a man to get away with the crime. He's been convicted, and this is not some situation where it's just he said, she said. As one of the jurors pointed out, one of the most damning parts of this case was Bill Cosby's own statements, his own incriminating statements that he made during his own deposition, where he talks about drugging women to have sex with them, where he talks about how he wasn't clear whether or not he had consent or not. You know, he talked about how he was in the zone between permission and rejection, but he went forward. Nobody forced him to make those statements. Those statements were very damaging, as that juror stated during his interview. I think it was on ABC, and I'll post a link to that interview as well. So this is not some situation of mob justice at all. Unlike that Emmett Till situation where you had an all-white jury. And then that's another, before I go into that, I'll just say this. I mean, you're going to compare the lynching, a physical lynching of a 14-year-old boy to the conviction of a guilty rapist. I think that that's absurd. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous. Emmett Till did not have any kind of trial. He was summarily lynched by a mob. He was taken out of his loved one's home and lynched in the middle of the night. He was lynched. He didn't go before some jury about sexual assault. A mob went in there and they lynched that brother. To compare that to a situation where you have this multi-millionaire with all kinds of resources to defend himself, you know, it's just absolutely asinine and absolutely ridiculous, man. There's no comparison. No comparison at all. You know, this woman's case was strengthened by Bill Cosby's own statements against interest. So this is not some Emmett Till situation where you had a lynch mob kill that brother, and then once the killers were brought on trial, you had an all-white jury participate in jury nullification. There's no comparison to this Bill Cosby situation. And, you know, the fact that you have people, these race hustlers and race pimps, trying to exploit this situation to make it into some civil rights case or some kind of racial justice matter is absurd. I mean, and then, you know, this suggestion that this woman is lying in order to get money. Bill Cosby, in his own deposition, said that he did not think Andrea Constand was out for his money. That's what Bill Cosby said back when he was deposed. But yet people want to change the narrative and make it seem like this woman is out for his money. And I understand that some people just get wrapped up into the frenzy of things. You know, a lot of people understand the history of the criminal justice system being unjust towards black people. And I think that that history has clouded a lot of our people's judgment so that they can't see this case for what it is. I mean, I'm not going to repeat what was said in my other videos. Instead, I'll just post a link in the cards. But again, you had this guy who was joked about drugging women. you know, has done these Spanish fly routines in his comic shows and all that kind of stuff. Has done interviews talking about this on Larry King. The guy is a creep, man. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And the fact that you got all these black people trying to make this guy into some kind of martyr for black people when he talked down to black people, trying to make him some martyr for black people when this guy runs around chasing white women with his tongue hanging out of his mouth like a typical coon. But this is the guy that people want to turn into some cause, like as if he is Huey P. Newton, like free Huey P. Newton or something, or free Nelson Mandela or something. This guy is not no Nelson Mandela. This guy is not no Huey P. This is not some issue of mob justice. This is a rich man who had every opportunity to defend himself, and his team just failed. The jury was convinced that those other witnesses were more credible. And again, Bill Cosby didn't even have the courage to testify in his own case. So with that, I'm going to say peace and blessings to each and every one of you. And I know the haters are going to have fun with this one. Peace.